So as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. So if you need to refer to anything, we will have the recording at a later date. Let me get my screen bigger and then go in. Oops. Can everybody see my screen? Kathy, can you see it?
Yes, we see it, Pauline.
Okay, good. Thank you, guys. Last time I was prattling along and nobody could see my screen, remember? So the meeting's called to order at 4:03? And I'm not sure if Brent's gonna jump on later. I'm gonna take us through the meeting, and Ruben Aurelio is gonna join me at some point when he's off his other meeting, because we have quite a few ed services situations that we want to talk about, or scenarios we want to talk about. So let's look at the agenda. We've linked the documents. They were late. We were working on them this weekend, but I've updated the links, and I asked Vivian to let everybody know that we have updated the links. And we also have the files in our shared folder, in our shared drive. So if anybody wants to access the actual documents, you can go and look at the documents in the folder. So we're going to look at the slide deck I just presented to the board last Wednesday. So I'd like to share that with the committee members who may not have seen the board presentation. And this slide deck talks about community engagement. So we know we have work ahead of us in terms of soliciting feedback from our other budget partners, and possibly doing a town hall, and reaching out to our principals and employees. So that's still to be done. That's a work in progress. We're going to take a look at our update on our revenue assumptions as we are looking at 22-23. Our one-time expenditures grouped by funding source. So what is being covered and how are we proposing that it will be covered? Looking at our cut strategies and update, and our expense scenarios as well, just in terms of how we thinking we're going to afford what we're proposing. At the last meeting, I was asked to do some research on our workers' comp and our ADA. I have a link to our ADA file, and I can speak to my an update on workers' comp. And then also, since our last meeting, I've met with the special ed, well, I met with Ruben, who supervises special ed, and they have a proposal for providing mental health services at a reduced rate. I still have some questions on the proposal, and it's not final, but we just want to let you know our thinking at this point. And then we also realized we have carryover in our restorative restart grants that we are allowing a carryover for. There was some discussion on that, and we are determining we're going to be using it for the same purposes that was in the restorative restart grants. So that's what I think we're going to try and cover in an hour and a half. Anybody has anything they want to add or any comments? Okay, so as a chairperson of this committee, I'll take you through the agenda, and then if there at any point if there's any additional information needed, please don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll bring it back to the next meeting. And at the bottom of our agenda, we have our timeline in terms of our roadmap, in terms of our straw poll and our final vote on budget recommendations. So this is the February 22nd meeting. We have 4 more meetings before we want to land at a straw poll from this committee, and the final vote on May 24th. So any comments, any feedback? Hearing and seeing none, I will then like to open up the meeting for public comment. If there's anybody here, we're going to give you 3 minutes. If there's anybody here to speak on public comments. Can anybody see there's anybody here for public comments? Okay, I'm assuming there's none. So superintendent comments. I'm not sure if Brent's going to be joining us today. I know he had something to take care of, personal business to take care of today. So if he comes in, we'll welcome him. If not, we have enough to keep us busy. And we have his input from, you know, he has helped me present and put this slide deck together. So we have his voice, even though he might not be here. So as a show of hands, how many people actually saw the presentation to the board at the last meeting? Can I see, Vivian, can you let me know how many, did anybody see the presentation? Let me ask it that way. Matt, did you get a chance to see it?
No, not yet. I know.
Scandalous.
Oh, you know, I think I scrolled through it, but didn't watch it live.
Oh, no. Well, now you have a chance to sit through it again. I'm going to take us through this pretty quickly. I'm also going to be presenting this to DLAC. And this was our best thinking as of last week. And of course, it's a moving target. So we have updates to this information since this slide deck. There's something in the chat. What is in the chat? Oh, Nicole is halfway through watching the video. Thanks, Nicole. So I'm just going to take us through the slide deck, and then we're going to start looking at our updates on our assumptions, and then soliciting feedback from the committee. And I'm going to go into presentation mode, slide share mode. It's loading. So as this is loading, just by way of feedback, this is just an update to the board in terms of where we are in the process. So some of SBAC's thinking is represented here, and we're basically outlining a roadmap in terms of what we're still working on, where we think we have to go, and whether we have the boards, if the board kind of is okay with our direction or the approach that we're taking. So that was the purpose of this slide deck, an update to the board and to get their feedback. It's by no means finalized, but just to get their feedback in terms of our approach, or to see if we've omitted anything. I don't think we had omitted anything. So with that, let's get going. So I already told you what the whole agenda was about. The overall approach to budgeting. We reminded the board that we're using our priorities for budget reductions. We're focusing on the general fund, our revenue, expenses, and reduction targets. And of course, looking at the available capacity and current program priorities based on our one-time funding. Again, our approach to the board, are we on the right track with our overall approach? And two, we know we have a lot of work to do with our community and our other partners, but we wanted to know at this point, even before we solicit that feedback, have we missed any key board priorities at this stage? So again, this committee is pretty familiar with the whole process. You know, we're basing our budget assumptions on the governor's budget. We are working with a 5.33% COLA. There are rumors of further increases in the COLA. We haven't heard anything concrete, but there are rumors. So to the extent that this is actually in the May revise, the actual budget will be based on the May revise. So we tend to be conservative and base our assumptions on the governor's budget in January, his May revise, and the enacted budget in June. The ADA formulas that the board is using, that the governor is using, it still has not gone to the legislature. It's a whole new process. of funding LCFF. So it is new. We are scoring it as revenue in 22-23. I'm waiting for the budget guidelines from ACOE in terms of the second interim. When I met with our CBOs, there was some discussion about reserving the additional amount, which would be about $4 million, targeting it, kind of setting it aside in the fund balance just in case it's not materialized. I will see if they have any updated assumptions or updated guidelines. But that's for 22-23, and I would be bringing it back to the board May 6th for the second interim. And of course, we are starting negotiations, or we will be starting negotiations with our 4 bargaining groups. And at this point, we have not scored any set-asides for the impact of collective bargaining. And of course, COVID is still an unknown. We suspect we're going to get additional funding, but it has not been clarified at this point. And we have a link to our budget milestones that are probably going to take us a little while to go through this, but this is our best thinking in terms of, while this gets loaded, let me try and make this a little bigger so you can see it. This is what we shared with the board in terms of using our principles, where we are in the process and what still needs to be done. So you can take a look at this. You can see, we're scoring our various meetings. We're at the February 22nd meeting here. We also have P&O DLAC on the 22nd, and we have a PAC meeting on the 28th. So I think next year there was there was a suggestion made that we don't have all the meetings back to back on the same day. It would be nice if we could kind of spread them out when we're doing the budget calendar. But I think Ruben's at another meeting, and he's going to the P&O and DLAC this evening as well. So we're all stretched pretty thin. But then in terms of the other dates, I'm not going to take you through this. I focused on our dates, but just to share with you that we are also interfacing with other groups, DLAC and PAC, as well as trying to do a town hall and get a community survey and working with OFI to reach out to our community and staff. So just to reiterate that the budgeting process is not made in isolation. We depend on working with SBAC and other groups to solicit feedback and to get your input in terms of the process. I'm going to take us back to the, any questions on that? So hearing none. So let's go, I'm going to take it to the next slide here. So we do have an update to the reduction strategies that we had in December. As you guys know, we started with the ACOE reductions and we're fine tuning that, but it's still in development. And again, reiterating that we have to work with all our communities and our communities and committees, and to remind the board that they have until June 1st to approve our budget reduction targets. And of course, your date is the Wednesday before that date for your recommendation. I've shared this with you before, and I'm not going to go over it. You're welcome to open this again, just in terms of looking at our guidelines that we use. But we want to make sure that, it's a fair process again, and that it's not going to impact our student learning. We're going to try, we used to say cut away from the classroom, but all our best thinking is in this document, which I think it's good for us to review from time to time as we're sitting on this committee. So again, not only do we have our guiding principles, but of course, our goal is to ensure that the district is fiscally solvent, which means we're required to have a balanced budget, which means at this point, technically it means we're not deficit spending. In this context, it means that we have a positive ending fund balance, so that we have a positive certification for the current year and the two subsequent years. So that would be 22-23 next year and the 2 out years. We do want to ensure that we're maximizing the use of one-time and alternative funding sources. I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in the meeting. We are going to be trying to avoid eliminating filled positions as much as possible. And of course, we are aware that we are just starting the collective bargaining process. We want to make sure that we have funding identified for our collective bargaining process. So, and this is from the multi-year, and I think what I'll do for DLAC, because a lot of the DLAC members would not have seen the multi-year, I shared with this group our multi-year at first interim and the governor's assumption for 22-23 and 23-24. And you may or you may not remember, there was we were deficit spending in both years, 21-22 and 22-23, but we did have a positive ending fund balance, and we did set aside $1 million for expenses. So the interesting thing to note about this multi-year is that we are getting $6.4 million, but it's being absorbed by increasing costs and our structural deficit. So we have our employer pension costs, we have our second column, the impact of declining enrollment, special education. We have not built in a reduction of cost. You know, we're picking up the additional revenue as a savings, but special education costs do continue to increase, and that does put a lot of pressure on our budget. So of the $6.4 million, we had set aside $1 million for new expenses or for one-time expenses paid for, ongoing expenses paid for by OneTime Funding. So interesting to note that $1 million is a combination of base and supplemental funding. So it's not all base funding. Some of that, it should be set aside for LCAP expenditures as well. So I'll discuss that further as we go along. So the conclusion that this group and we all are aware of, we do need budget reductions. We cannot balance the budget and meet new expenses with the extra $1 million, even though the governor's budget was really favorable. We still have a structural deficit, and we are still working on the assumption that we would need reductions if we're going to increase or add any new expenses in addition to the $1 million. So our current reduction target of $4.1 million, that number keeps shifting. That was as of last week. I will share with you what our current reduction target is now in terms of the additional expenses we're trying to accomplish. So we are going to be taking you through an updated list from the ACOE budget reductions. Of the $4.1 million, we're looking at $3.8 million in budget balancing solutions. So that's the $1.9 million from the general fund. That's $1 million and the amount from SPED. The $1 million, no, sorry, the $1.9 million is general fund reduction. So I have a slide on each one of these areas. The $1 million new revenue from the governor's budget, and we have $900,000. So at that point in time, we're looking for $300,000. But as we fine tune this process, that number is a moving target, and I'll keep you updated with our current assumptions so that we're all on the same page. So this is our general approach as we're looking at the 22-23 budgets. What's going to be paying for, which cost center is going to be bearing which costs? So of course, the general fund pays for labor costs. Actually, all departments and all funds will have to pick up their share of the labor costs. But we're looking at the impact to the unrestricted general fund will be paid for by the general fund. Stirs and PERS increases will be paid for by the general fund. Our workers' compensation increase, I have an update proposal on that and some feedback. I think it was it Matt, I think, who requested additional information. And for eco-literacy, there's a proposal for one-time funding and ongoing costs, which I'll be sharing with you later on as well. Then we look at our affinity-based programs, our Black Lives Matters, our Latinx resolution, our social and emotional supports, environmental literacy, COVID expenses, and early literacy supports. We're looking at one-time funding or new funding sources that's ongoing. So our extended learning grant is $1 million a year. It's ongoing. The catch with that funding is that it has to be spent on before school or after school projects or programs. So the challenge for us as a committee is identifying which are our before and after school programs that this funding will not supplement, or that will supplement but not supplant, and then we can use freeing up other funds to take advantage of that $1 million. Does everybody see where I'm going with that? Or so we're getting $1 million in restricted fundings. We have to find out what's the use of that $1 million. We have to identify existing expenses that would qualify for that new funding so we can free up the general fund or other funding sources to meet our budget priorities. So it's a lot of shuffling and trying to maximize to maximize other funding sources. And then of course there's always the option of looking at deferring expenses to another year. So this raised a lot of comments at the board meeting, but to clarify, just to reiterate, and I can do it for this group because you've seen our budget reductions. I don't think we shared the detail with the board, but this position is currently staffed in another department. So what we don't want to do is to staff that position like have two people doing the same job in two different departments. So our plan, the deferring to 22-23 is a full examination of the position in terms of where it should be funded or how it should be funded, but it's not going to require new funding sources. It's going to be existing funding sources. But that's one of the things that we're thinking we could think about the approach for this position in 23-24. So it's not that we're eliminating funding and HR is not going to have funding, or that's not what this is about. This is a position that's currently funded in one department and trying to see if the work can be done in another department that should not have an impact on our budget. But that's a decision that we're going to be looking at in 23-24.
Pauline, sorry to interrupt. Emily Nathan has a question in the chat.
Oh, hi, Emily. I can't see the chat, so just interrupt me if you want to say so. I can't see your hand. That's not anything.
Sorry.
Stop me and I can totally respond to you. Yes, Emily.
Okay, thank you. Hi, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Is there a particular, when you were talking about position, is there a particular position you're talking about or just in general positions?
It's a position control support position that we're looking at.
Position control. What is that? Will you
That's
remind
the
me?
person that position control traditionally in most districts, finance handles the fiscal part of it in terms of making sure they're board authorized positions that are fully budgeted. Nobody's putting in positions without a budget. And that represents 80% or 90% of budget. So it's critical that this is accurate. What has happened at Berkeley is that because of whatever challenges they had at the time, the fiscal department also puts people in positions. Well, that's an HR function. So it's not, we're working with HR to come up with the best way to get this whole function, both the placing of people and the budgeting side, the fiscal side and the HR side. We're working together to see what's the best way to fund and to move forward with the process. not necessarily a position. So this is something that Sam and myself and Liz, we're aware of and we're discussing. But what we don't want to do is to say, okay, fiscal has somebody doing both sides and HR is going to have somebody added doing the exact same function. So we have to decide what's the best way for this position to actually move forward with this
Can I add
position.
something, Pauline, real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Just for people who don't speak this language.
Oh,
When this isn't working, it means that people aren't getting paid. So that I just want to be really clear that it's currently, there's some issues here, as Pauline is describing, that need to be sorted out. But what we have seen is because of those issues, we have employees that are not being paid at all, that are missing stipends or missing parts of their FTE. And so this is actually a critical piece that needs to actually be figured out, because it has resulted in lots of time trying to get people paid when they're not. So it sounds like a very boring kind of function, but it's actually a super critical function. It connects people to positions so payment can happen.
thanks, Matt. That's a critical thing for us all to understand. And it's also from a fiscal point of view, you know, salaries and benefits, that's what, 80–90% of our salaries. So not only does it impact people's pay, it also impacts the budgeting. But this is not to say, you know, the way that it has been done. It's a lot of communication between departments, and we're working on that. We're having our new system in place, our new escape. So it's an area that we're partnering with HR to determine the best way to do this, but we don't think it's going to be another position because we do have the budget for this position already in place. So we're working together. But in terms of 23-24, we're going to look at the impact of escape because we don't know what that's going to do to the process. And then we're thinking in 23-24, we will have, and probably before that, but it's not something that we're thinking of funding right away if there's funding required. So it's more of a funding decision at this point that will be deferred to 23-24 and not a functional decision, not based on the function, because we have to have position control. Anything else? Anybody else has a question in the chat? Yes. How do you pronounce your name?
Tasang, sorry, Tasang.
Tasang.
Yeah, I just have a quick question about the extended learning piece. So that's a one-time $1 million grant. Is that right? Has that been spoken for? Has that been budgeted out to be used?
No, it has not, because that's a challenge that we're actually facing now, because that program is very specific in terms of its use. It can be used for before school and after school programs. Most of our after school programs are funded either by ACES or by parent fees. So it's not going to impact the general fund. So our challenge is to look at programs that's currently paid for by the general fund or BSEP or LCAP that would qualify for this funding. And then we would be doing a swap, kind of like moving expenses that BSEP could pay for, LCAP could pay for, moving it from their funds to this restricted funding. It's ongoing funds for, and it's about $1 million a year that we'll be receiving.
That's ongoing. And I'm sorry, does it also include summer school, or it's
Yes,
only after school?
It's also, yeah, summer school as well.
It's both summer school and extended learning. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Sure. Anything else? Oh. That's scary. Okay, so in terms of our one-time funding, we've listed the 370 here. The $1 million is the expanded learning. Mental health, this is another area that could possibly provide some relief for the general fund. The mental health partnership grant with the City of Berkeley, we're getting $650,000 a year for 4 years for this grant. So, and then the A to G readiness grant, this, the county told us this was $341,000. They since came back and said, whoops, we made an error. We don't know how big of an error, but this is funding actually in 21-22 that we have not spent. And we're projecting we're going to be carrying it over for 22-23. I have a slide on this that looks at this closer. Educator effectiveness, we had actually spoken about taking some of this funding as one of our budget saving steps, $250,000 per year for 4 years. Hi, Ruben. Ruben just joined us. And then, of course, we're not sure about the COVID funding from the state. Ruben, I'm just taking them through the slide deck. So we haven't gotten to your section as yet.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. Sorry, I was in a different meeting. One of those
I told them
One of
how
those
many
evenings.
meetings you have to this evening. It's crazy. So we're going to change it next year in the budget calendar for sure. We're not going to do this again. So this is a look at all our one-time staffing, and we have looked at that. When I take us through the one-time slide, most of these have found a home, and to the extent that we haven't, we're still working on a swap, trying to use our ELO funding. And of course, our pandemic supports. This is just looking at carving out individual pieces of the budget. Just in terms of our pandemic support, we have spent about we're scheduled to spend $1.2 million in 21-22. In 22-23, we have no idea what is actually going to be, what we're going to be funded for, but we know we want to at least, we're projecting that we will need a full-time testing coordinator, a contact tracer, and we will need PPE. And that we're thinking is $650,000. And we're trying to do that from OneTime Funding, Fund 20, which is our the post-employment or retirement fund that we've used as a savings account, if you will, or new COVID funds if available. So the question has been raised, are we really going to go from 13 testing and 3 contact tracing down to 1? Is that your question, Robin?
No, I was waving to someone, sorry.
Oh, I thought you were asking. I was ready to wave back. Okay, so we have to wait and see. It's an unknown. We are planning on using other funding. We have not set aside any general fund money for this at this point. Last time we met, we were thinking of using $650,000 of general funds to meet this expense, but when we met in cabinet, we thought, okay, well, let's use one-time funds or other funding sources to take care of this. And of course, this is our affinity programs in terms of what we're thinking for Black Lives Matter and our African American Success Initiative. You can see what the status is and what we're projecting for 22-23. We still have to determine what we need to spend for 22-23. But if there are questions on specific questions, I think Ruben can actually speak to this. Young, gifted, and Black. I mean, we're going to look at all of these in more detail as well. So this is a great summary and a great introduction to what we're going to be doing later. A Latinx resolution, it's listed here in terms of what we're thinking of currently 225, what we're projecting for 22-23. And we're thinking $67,000 of the 182 will be funded from the general fund. And of course, we'll be looking at our multilingual master plan, parent engagement, Latino literacy, and our appointed program. So again, this is more on the Ed Services side that I'm sure Ruben will be happy to discuss further if you have questions.
I have a quick question, Pauline, if that's okay.
Sure.
For the two slides that you just showed, the Latinx resolution and and the Black Lives Matter resolution. So so it's saying one time and alternative funding, does that mean these are short-term programs or?
Well, they were funded by one-time funding in 22-23. So either we will use one-time funding or alternative ongoing funding in 21-22. We had one-time funding. A lot of that was done on COVID funds and other one-time funding sources. And in 22-23, we're thinking either it will be one-time funding again, or if we have alternative funding, new funding ongoing that comes in, that we can use for these programs, we would do that. So it's to be determined.
Got it, okay.
Yeah, the cost is to be determined for Black Lives Matter. For Latinx, we're saying it's $182,000, of which $67,000 would be from the general fund.
And one thing to note with both of these, sort of these affinity-based programs, a lot of it was on one-time dollars for this year, but to make them really systemic, something that's lasting in our district, we're going to have to find ways to build it within our structure, because we can't continually rely on just one-time dollars, because those come and go, they change, the strings change, you know, what we can and cannot fund. So if this is something that raises up to a high priority, we have to then prioritize it within our budget, looking at it long-term.
Thanks, Ruben.
And then just something really quickly while we have the associate superintendent here. Can you explain the 0.5 FTE asterisk at the bottom of that?
Oh, yeah, sure. So we had a couple OFE specialists, which is the Office of Family Equity Engagement positions, the specialist positions. There was 4 positions that were new for this school year. We had originally froze a handful of those positions that were on one-time dollars. And then we also had, in addition to those 4 positions, 1 vacant site-based position that was at Sylvia Mendez and Thousand Oaks. And we heard pretty loud and clear, both from SBAC, from DLAC, from a couple of different groups, that they didn't want us to necessarily freeze the central office bilingual specialist position. So when we went to hire the bilingual specialist position that was for Sylvia Mendez and Thousand Oaks, we actually ended up with really two strong candidates. So we ended up deciding to take the 1.0 position, essentially sharing that across the 2 sites. So we ended up with 2 people, same FTE allocation, that are both bilingual. One is now with Sylvia Mendez, halftime and halftime central, and one is Thousand Oaks, halftime and halftime central. Same number of FTE, but now we have the ability to have, technically we have 3 halftime people serving the OFE department centrally. The third one being Ramona McCreary, who's Ruth Acti in central office. So it really gives us a richer department to support some of the central office engagement that has to happen.
Any other questions for Ruben? Okay, I'll put this on if I can. Now my screen's frozen. Hold on. Okay, so this slide just talks about our next steps, and we keep reiterating that we need to solicit feedback from our community and to continue to work with committees to identify budget reductions. And of course, since this is all based on the governor's budget, when we get any additional information based on the assumptions that we should be using, we'll update our projections accordingly. And our challenge, of course, is to continue to identify budget efficiencies, savings, and administrative support needed to support expanding programming. So we have to be careful we're not recommending expanded programming without the administrative support to shore up these programs. And again, the governor's May revision and enacted budget, any information in those 2 in either of those budgets will impact our budget as well. And again, we're talking about the board reductions. Sorry about that. Board reductions in June. So are we on the right track? And this is with our thinking, and the board said, I think the board said, yes, we were. I'm pretty sure they did.
I think we
And
got
then-
thumbs up. So
We
that's,
got thumbs up, yeah, we did. So the board is okay with this approach. So, and that was the main, I'll stop this. I'll just take us back to our agenda. So that was the main purpose of our slide deck. So, any questions for Ruben or myself? Okay, hearing none. Again, we're stressing our community engagement. We're still working on our community outreach. And we're going to be talking to our principals to get their feedback. So what I'm presenting tonight has, we haven't floated this by our principals, by staff. So it's a pretty, it's not as evolved as it could be, but we still have some more work to do in terms of outreach.
right. I mean, just this evening alone, we have DLAC that'll get that same sort of budget presentation that you just saw. And we also have P&O this evening as well. So there's a lot of meetings happening almost simultaneously.
Correct. So, okay, so let's look at our revenue. So in the slide deck, we had shared some revenue sources with you. So I'd just like you to share our thinking in terms of revenues with this group, and kind of like trying to start to corral things and kind of look at them all together as opposed to a scattered approach. So in terms of our revenue, so we had talked about this. So the top part kind of looks at the things that we are taking into account already. We know we're getting the 5.33% COLA. That's giving us $6.4 million. The base is actually, what is this saying? The additional amount that's actually available for base, that will be $630, and for supplemental, it will be $370,000. That gives us $1 million. So now we're starting to break apart the $1 million, realizing that $370,000 of that is actually for our supplemental program. SPED, we talked about this. This shouldn't be anything new. We talked about it when we were looking at our budget reduction list, because we're hoping that this additional funding will not be used for new programming. It will be used for existing programming, and therefore reducing the contribution from the general fund. And this amount may be a little higher. This is our best thinking. So this is the new considerations that was mentioned in the board document. So what I've done here, if I could freeze my columns, it's actually looking at what's in this year versus what we can kind of bring forward. And no, I can't do this. What we can read in 21-22 and what's in 22-23. So A to G is actually a 21-22 funding. It expires in 2026. We're thinking we're going to be using most of this in 22-23. But we're needing to identify the amount, the correct amount, because we just heard last week that amount, the CDE gave us the wrong calculation. There was an error. LCAP is already included above the $370,000. The ELO, this is $1 million in 21-22 and an additional $1 million in 22-23, and it's ongoing. So our challenge is to find our programs that can be funded with this additional funding, or do we add programs, or this is a lot of money for an ongoing program, and that's our challenge there. Our mental health partnership we talked about as well, educator effectiveness. So this is basically a rehash of what we saw in the presentation, but I'm just keeping it kind of separate so we know what the buckets are. Eventually, I'll be identifying the use of some of these funds. So I haven't scored any of these as yet, because we're still trying to finalize what should be used where and when. So that's the first bucket, if you will, our revenues. And we're just kind of fine tuning it as we go along. So our one-time expenses, when you saw this list before, it was just a general list with all funding sources. This list now looks at the different funding sources that we're trying to identify, and can we score these against the revenues that I just shared with you. So the $361,000, this is for one-time expenses that we're proposing that the general fund covers. So that's our MultiYear Black Studies departmental budget. Eco-literacy was split between one-time and ongoing. So we've already done the startup costs. So this represents the cost for 22-23. College bound would be funded by, we're proposing that the general fund pays for college bound, the staffing that goes along with college bound, as well as our board memberships and conferences. And this is an additional cost for our board membership and conferences.
Pauline,
So
I see a hand.
Huh? You
I
have
see
a
a
hand? I can't see anything, so
Yeah,
please.
Emily has her hand up.
Go
You want-
ahead, Emily.
Okay, sorry, I'm sorry I have so many questions. I'm trying to understand it all. For the 1 million you were saying that's for extended learning, like after school or summer. Do you
Yeah.
have, and this can be super general answer, do you have any sense of how much like general fund, like ballpark general fund money is actually used for after school and summer? Because I know ACES
none.
and
Yeah, so I remember you were over those programs. So Emily, I think I mentioned earlier, we use restricted funding, ACES. And we
right,
also use parent fees.
parent fees, yeah.
Right, so it's not gonna relieve the general fund to suddenly, if we use this additional restricted funding to pay for those programs. It's not gonna relieve the general fund. The
Right,
challenge is to find, well, summer school was mentioned.
right,
So
summer school,
summer school was mentioned as well as before school and after school. So which programs, and this is for the ed services side of the house, what programs do we currently have before school and after school that's paid for by the general fund? It was mentioned garden and cooking, but I think garden and cooking's curriculum is during the day. I don't know if Ruben, if
Right.
that's during the day.
Yeah, there is a
Um,
limitation on the ELO dollars. It has to be sort of to extending the day.
Right,
So we wouldn't necessarily fund, for example, a TSA could not be funded out of the ELO unless they were working after hours.
correct. So that's
Okay.
the challenge for this group.
Yeah.
Or for us to put our heads together to think about that collectively. Somebody did mention garden and cooking, but that's not after school. So we do pay $300,000 a year for that program, but again, the timing wouldn't work for this grant.
yeah, so that could be helpful information, just like a general overview of the after school, before school and summer program funding sources to see what, if there are ways to be creative. Because my recollection is it's pretty self-sustaining, so I don't know. I'm wondering what
Right.
we can shift around, and if not, then that could result in additional programming, which could be awesome, but I know that's that's not what we're talking about right now.
Not right
Anyway.
now. So
but,
I think
yeah.
I think we can explore. I think we can rule out the after school and before school, because we don't use a general fund for that. We don't use it for salaries, nothing. We already checked that, but we would be happy to revisit that. Summer school may be an option that we can look into that, because I know that's paid for by the general fund.
I believe so, that
Yeah.
at least years ago when I was around, yes.
Mhm.
I see we also have Matt's virtual hand is up.
Great. Just in terms of the ELO money, one thing I don't know if this is possible or not, but there's a lot of teachers are paid on timesheets for work done outside the duty day, which involves students. The teacher hourly rate specifically involves work with students. And the curriculum development rate typically involves meetings that then, involves student outcomes. So it's just an idea. If we're looking for some shifts, I don't know if we are, kind of
Yeah.
got lost in there a little bit. Doing a little analysis of what are we paying for out of the general fund using teacher hourly or curriculum development rate, and possibly shifting some of that to ELO.
And Matt, to that point, Matt, we also potentially have the educator effectiveness grant money, which is really tied closely to professional development. So that could potentially pick up some of those things too.
For a curriculum development rate, for sure. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I'll research those summer school, and then the teacher hourly rates would be areas that we could revisit. I'll bring that back to the next meeting. Thanks, Max. That's helpful. Thanks, Emily. Any other suggestions from the team? Silence. I can't see anybody's hands. So.
No more hands.
Okay. So from LCAP, this is our McKinney Vento counselor. That was paid for, I think, by ELO last year. And again, that was kicking the can down the road. LCAP can absorb this position going forward.
And I do want to mention with this one specifically, because of our differentiated assistant status as a district for homeless students, that's actually an important piece, because we need to articulate in our LCAP a specific goal for that group. So there's a clear sort of connection here with this role.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ruben. I was calling you Matt. So educator effectiveness. This was our K-8 coordination of school-based services that was paid for by ELO. We're thinking that we'll have educator effectiveness pick up this cost next year. Then you're gonna see where we kind of went off the rail a little. So this is where we had said, okay, can ELO pick up this $231,000 of FTEs and our literacy coach? And looking at this now, the answer would be no. So one of the things we can start to think of is, would these be because that BSEP could pick up in a swap? And does BSEP have any before school and after school programs that we could use for ELO money and conceivably have them pay for this? So, I don't know if Kathy, I asked Liz Karam, who used to be the fiscal analyst, and she said it depends on each person's plan and what have you. But Kathy, hate to put you on the spot, but do you know of any before, after school programs that BSEP currently pays for that we could use ELO funding for that?
Not any before and after school, like aftercare type programs. However, we do have, the expanded course offerings, which budgets FTEs for courses and sections. So I think the answer is no to that, but I can look into it further.
And would these be expenses that that BSEP, I mean, I know math and our RTI coach, our literacy coach that was formerly in are these expenses that could possibly be swapped into BSEP?
Potentially, I'd have to look at which resource and what the parameters are per the measure language, and also look at the fund balance and if we're already in a deficit spending state. So I would need a little time to look into that.
Okay, so let's plan on bringing that back to the next meeting. I would research the teachers that are paid possibly after school, summer school, and Emily, I'll also look at the after school program, but I doubt that very much. And then if you could look at this, Kathy, that would be helpful, because we just identified this 231 in our meeting this morning, and then when we looked at it closer, it really would not work at this point. So we do need a home for this 231, and we're trying to do a swap with another program. A to G grant, the bridge program, this is a 1.0 certificated position. Ruben, I don't know if you want to kind of clarify what's going on there with bridge.
Well, we're just looking at with this A to G grant, that's a one-time dollars for this year. If there's a connection that could be made here with the bridge programming and serving additional students, we might look at that as a way to expand the work there. I see 3 hands now. I see Nicole.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Question, I'm assuming, is it the ELO grant, that's a one-time funding, I'm assuming?
So
I'm sure you said it's
No, the ELO is the $1 million that's ongoing.
ongoing. Okay, great, thanks.
yep.
And we have $1 million in this year. We remember the funding slide. There's $1 million from this year and then another $1 million ongoing. So we're going to be building up a huge fund. And what is the rule, Ruben? If we don't use it, obviously we lose it, right? It's restricted.
You're not quoting me on that one. I don't know that one. I'm not going to say that. I don't know if it's a use it or lose it. I think I don't want to say something that's not true. So I will stay silent on the use it or lose it piece.
It's restricted, and that's usually the rule for restricted, unless they're allowed carryover, forever.
Right. Exactly. You have a couple more hands up.
Okay,
Hey, son?
Yeah, Sung, hi, thanks again. Sorry, is the ELO new or have we had this for a while? I just want to know some history. Is
So
it new?
This ELO, it's actually ELO-P, and it was brought on new this year with
Okay.
an ongoing. It's not just a one time. It is an ongoing. For us, it's $1 million. So there's $1 million this year, $1 million next year, so on and so forth.
Right. I think it was clarified in the governor's budget. It was one time this year in the governor's budget last year, but this year he has proposed ongoing funding for this program. So it wasn't always ongoing. It was kind of one time, and now I think it's ongoing.
There's been a change in how that's funded.
Yes.
Terry, is your hand still up, or did you put your hand down?
No, my question has been answered. Thank you so much.
Okay. No, and it says Alexander, but see, I knew it was.
I'm on my kid's Chromebook, obviously.
Yeah,
Thank
no
you.
worries.
Okay, so these are the funding for we're using Title I and Title III, and we're pretty this is for the EL Master Plan and other Latino family literacy. Any questions before I move on?
And just there, we can see that we are using some title dollars for some of these programs that are specific for targeted groups. So that's why we're able to use some of those title dollars. And I just want to clarify, the multilingual master plan is a much bigger contract this year because the bulk of the work is happening now. And we're just putting aside a small amount just to get us across the finish line if we have to extend, because we've had some delays this year with COVID and everything else. So that's why you see a 20,000.
Right. So the total transaction, well, the total cost will be 130, but we're identifying only $20,000 as a cost. So we look at what's not funded in a little while just to make sure everybody has a comfort level. And of course, the Restorative Restart grants, we have looked at the unspent balance just in terms of by each location, each site. And I think the majority of this unspent amount is at the high school. And there's been an ask to carry it over. So this money will be spent, it's almost restricted. So we can't use it for our purposes. It will be for restorative grant purposes. So, but we landed on that. It was it wasn't absolutely clear. And then we got a grant for RT Fisher. I don't think it was used this year. I think it's one time, but it's the Berkeley Public Schools Fund. We got a grant for $20,000 for this program. So we'll be using that for RT Fisher. I think it's for RT Fisher's.
That was the principal's learning circles.
Right.
Terry's hand is up. Go ahead, Terry.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I remembered something I wanted to circle back to on the BSEP question. Is the thought there that the BSEP funds would take over that amount from the monies that the P&O looks at or that the school site councils look at?
We haven't identified the actual funding source in BSEP, we're just considering it. But whatever funding source we land on, we're hoping that we would be relieving that funding source by a program that can be paid for by ELO. So it will be an equal swap. So there shouldn't be a cost impact. That's our goal, to not have a cost impact. But I don't know how realistic that is.
Regina?
Hi, yes. So I see that the RT Fisher Principals Learning Circles is viewed is twice. Is it happening to two different set of principals? So it's on top, but it's also under the not funded, partially funded, need to identify funding.
I think Ruben just explained that. So
Yeah,
the cost is
just go again,
100.
sorry.
Sorry, it's 130,000. So we're
Oh,
funding
that's-
20.
No, that's a
Okay.
different one. If you scroll
Which
down,
one?
Pauline,
Which
I-
one?
Regina's asking about the RT Fisher. So
Oh,
RT
this
Fisher
one.
is there's multiple
Oh, yeah, there's a
pieces
lot.
of that contract. So there's different components to that contract, Regina. One component has been the principal's learning circles. There was
Yeah,
a
so
grant-
it's number 78,
Oh,
right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right.
Oh, yeah.
So-
Yeah.
Good catch. Good catch.
So
Okay.
my question is it like one for elementary and high school principals, or is it just, it was
No,
like
it's an
accidentally
error.
doubled?
It's an
Okay,
error. It's an
Okay.
error.
thank you.
Yeah, no, there was 20,000. That was a
Mhm.
grant that I believe Ann Caligari wrote
Yeah,
through
that's
Berkeley
my-
School Funds.
Yeah. That's my error.
Yeah.
I took it from below and I didn't take it off of this list. So
No,
sorry.
thank you for
Thanks
clarifying.
catching that.
Yeah.
Thank
Yep,
you.
thank you for catching it.
So we just found $20,000. Woohoo.
Good job, Regina.
Go for it.
Oh, Regina.
So now we have the more the questions that we now need to figure out in terms of the things that we have not scored. And as it turns out, the yellow amount should be down here now, but it's a work in progress. But anyway, right now we're looking at those two OFI family liaisons. So there's a lot of information to this in column Q. I don't know if you guys can even see it. I can try to make this a little bit bigger.
Well, and I can help try talking through some of these just to make sure so I mentioned before, I think in that Latinx slide, when I was explaining those 4 liaison specialist positions, that 2 were one-time funded and 2 are ongoing. So we know that we froze and did not hire the 2 one-time, so that sort of dropped off there. But really the discussion is these 2 ongoing liaisons. One was the bilingual, which we've hired, and the other was a specialist that was supposed to be split between King and Willard. Those are the 2 positions. So we have the one in place that's bilingual, and I shared how that was hired, but I technically still have the vacancy for the Willard and King. I haven't moved on it yet, partly because I didn't know if we were going to continue to fund it moving into next year.
Okay.
So that's really where this fits here. So if we are going to continue to fund that, then we would need to account for it in our budget. Matt.
I just want to get clarity here. I got a little confused. So what you're saying is that part of this OFI staff that is currently been hired is funded. Is that correct? We have
one
that
of
funded,
these 2 FTEs is currently funded or in place, shall we say,
is
this year.
in place. Sorry,
And-
it's in place
No,
as
wait.
in they're hired, they're working.
Correct.
But we don't know for both of them, right? For next year, where the funding is coming from. Is that
No,
what you're
no,
saying?
I think I have some clarification in after talking to Sam this morning. So we had 4 liaison positions that were created in 21-22. 2 were funded with ongoing funds, so there wasn't even a discussion. And 2 were funded with the one-time funds. These are the 2 positions funded with one-time funds, and they were not filled
Okay.
last year. They
Yeah,
were one
great.
time last year. So we're proposing that they're not move forward for 22, 23.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure that was my understanding. I just wanted to make sure that we don't have someone in a position that's now in a not
No.
funded category.
No,
These are
no.
both vacancies.
Right.
Right.
And
And
then
there's
the
a-
other
and there's a-
conversation,
3rd vacancy,
yeah,
essentially.
okay,
There's a-
great.
Right.
Thank
There's a
you.
third vacancy. So we got a lot of clarification this morning just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page. So one time, and we're proposing that we don't move them forward. And then this is what I thought, who was it who found that error? But I thought this is what she was talking about. So the EL master plan, part of it was 130 total. So we're doing 20,000 funded and 110 not funded. And we're okay with that, right, Ruben? Because this
Right.
cost represents startup costs that were funded in 21, 22. So
Right,
we
it
don't
represents the bulk of the work happening this year.
Right. And similarly for eco-literacy, the total amount that from last year, we're not moving the entire thing forward because this represents startup costs that were funded in 21, 22. I should probably say 21, 22. Any
Correct.
questions? Any questions on that?
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Emma.
For the OFFE positions, you were, so I don't totally get it, but that's okay. There's 3 vacancies. One of the ones that you mentioned was a position split between Willard and King.
Yes.
Is there opportunity for input on that, or is that a
So
decision
that's-
being made that you're not filling those 3 positions?
No, so my understanding now, we originally had froze these positions back in November when we were starting to generate a cut list for the county. That's where a lot of this discussion started. We then also heard from everyone, please don't freeze the bilingual position. So we ended up moving forward with hiring the bilingual position. Now that we've moved beyond that cut list from the county and we're not needing to submit that, my direction, since I'm the de facto OFFE director right now, would be to hire this outstanding or vacant specialist, which would be a King Willard specialist.
Yes.
So I have the
Okay.
green light. I have the green light to hire that position now.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense. And I see
That
Janet's
answered
on
your
board.
question.
So Janet, news to you, right?
Janet. Woohoo.
Do I get to pick where
I want you to.
do I
you can
get to
help
pick
me.
where I want additional funding to go?
Uh-oh. Kind of worms. That's directed at you, Ruben.
I know.
Janet, we'll get back to you on that.
It's great news. I also want direct services to kids.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want some of
Thank
that
you.
mental health
Well,
grant.
that's what Janet had asked. I didn't do that. Anyway, so let's see. So this additional FTE, and I mean, I know we're spending a lot of time, but I just want everybody to get a comfort level with the things we're not moving forward with and why. So last year in 21, 22, we had to pick up an additional FTE for Berkeley High School class size. BSEP paid for, actually we picked up 2/3 and BSEP picked up 1/3. But we're not moving this forward without further analysis in terms of class sizes. We've redone the teacher template where it's projected based on new enrollment numbers. So at this point, it's not moving forward. We'll reassess if it's needed, and if it's needed, it will be added to the budget moving forward. Any questions? Okay, COVID supplies, we had it on one-time funding, general fund last time. It's going to be, if we need it, it's going to be other funding sources. So we're not adding it to the general fund. Young, gifted, and Black. These 3, huh?
You want me to speak to these next couple items?
Yeah, the 3 items. Yeah, that's not in
So
the
this
budget.
this goes back to, if we were looking at the slide decks, the affinity-based programming. So we do have a contract with Young, Gifted, and Black to provide services. This has been an odd year. We have not really seen a lot of these services come into play very well with COVID. So we are assessing that. It's not a fair year to assess it, but it is something that we're going to be considering if that's a service or that we want to continue to do for our students. The RT Fisher contract is really broken into a couple categories. One of the big categories was to support us in developing the African American Success Initiative through the framework. And that's work that's been ongoing and should be wrapping up this year, that framework. So we wouldn't need the same level of contract with the Robin Fisher for that work. The other layer is STEM Steps, which is direct services to students. And that's a platform where they provide after-school programming, supports, instruction. And that is something that we're going to be meeting and conferring about with both RT Fisher and the group to see if that's something we're going to be continuing and or continuing at this level. So that is why I have TBD on all of these, because I've not fully landed on what level of contracting we would do with these organizations. We do know that they are in support of some of the resolutions we've written as a board, and we want to continue to support that work. I also want to be mindful that we want ongoing sort of systemic work that really isn't necessarily always driven by consultants, that's lasting for us. So, I want to be mindful of that. So there's a lot of questions I have, things I need to get answered, and movement. And I see some hands. Regina.
Is the STEM steps, that's the same or different from our Science Saturday we used to have years ago? Or I just don't know about the STEM steps.
I need to do more. I don't have a great understanding of that at this point.
Okay, just curious.
See, Janet replaced it in there.
Okay, thank you.
Any
Terry.
other questions? Oh.
Terry, I think your hand.
Oh, yeah, two quick questions. Number one, are the links to all of these documents going to still be available after the meeting through the agenda? So we can have a chance to go back and look and digest? Okay.
Yes, it's in our shared, where our shared folder is? You have access to our shared folder?
Yes.
Yeah, the documents are in there, and the agenda with the links are also in that folder.
Okay. And then my second question is, who do we direct questions to if we want or need some clarification to be able to give more definitive input in the next meeting?
You should send all your questions to Vivian and just put SBAC in the title so she knows that it's about SBAC, and she'll fill us in.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Matt.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. The RT Fisher contract this year was pretty gigantic, and it seems like what's being proposed but unfunded right now is a continuation. I'm just a little bit confused about what all this pays for. And if it's like $380,000, are these positions? Like, I'm just a little bit confused. And if so, or if any of this ends up being positions, why are we using consultants rather than our own certificated staff? We have district TSAs that do a lot of the work that I see that some of these consultants doing. So these are just questions I have. I don't have answers. I'm just wondering.
Those are really good questions, Matt. And this is the work that I have to do when I meet with this group and sort of get really clear articulation of what are the services being provided, when are they provided, or when will they be provided. Obviously, this contract was in place when I arrived here, it was already in place. So understanding fully the extent of this contract and the services provided. And we list these amounts here, not because we want to fund these amounts, but that's just the amounts that are currently funded. So that's why those dollars are there. It's not that those are the same levels we want to find in our budget for next year.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions on this page? I have to push us through. We have quite a lot to cover, and it's after 5, but I think it's important for you guys to know our thinking, and we're sharing as we did, discuss various pieces, we're sharing them with you for us to work on this together. That was on revenue. So let's look at expenses. We still have cut strategies, expense scenarios, ADA, and for me to talk about a special health proposal. So we have quite a lot to go through. So I'm
Pauline,
gonna
I'll
push
be right. Pauline, just letting you know, I'll be right back.
Okay. All right, so that was one-time expenses, guys. So on the agenda, the next thing is the cut strategies. So this is the meat of our matter, if you will, in terms of coming up with budget reductions to address the budget priorities and our ongoing expenses. So I had talked about what's new. I'm just going to walk us through what's new on this. And there's a proposal, there's a link to a proposal here that is a draft. It's still being worked on, and I apologize for everything not being absolutely final, but there are a lot of moving parts. So Ruben just left, but this is actually a, okay, this is a note to Sean. So right now we work with our Alameda behavioral, what is it? Alameda Behavior, Alameda County Behavioral Health. So we get our mental health, or they provide mental health services for our students. And either Sean or someone on his team has done this analysis in terms of staffing, the students served. What I have a question with, this is the rate per hour, which is great. We're trying to replace Alameda Behavioral Cultural Health, or looking at an option of replacing them with our school psychologists. So if we were to have 4 Berkeley Unified School psychologists, and also looking at probably using students to support this program, I think there's $30,000 working with our students. There are lots of discussion in terms of what the program will look like and what the savings will be. My only question at this point, and this needs to be explained, I mean, I could have SPED come back and explain this in more detail, but the only thing I know, we pay Alameda Behavioral Health almost over $1 million a year. So I'm not sure if they offer other services that's not in this scenario. And I had a question in for Sean. I didn't have it answered in time.
Yeah, and Pauline,
Oh, you're back.
This
Okay.
is mostly, so this is a portion of that contract that's directly dealing with the ERMS assessments. This is what's being articulated here. And that's the piece that we would be essentially no longer contracting with Alameda County Health. They do other things for us, but that portion of the contract would be that specifically these assessments.
Okay, so I would need to get a little bit of a better understanding in terms of what else is in that $1 million contract. Just to kind of see, I mean, you know, it's a good idea for us to, oh crap, did I just close that?
It's open.
No, I didn't. Oh, it's open. All right. So anyway, let us get back to the cut strategies, because that's where we're really focusing on. So right now we're looking at $200,000. I would like to bring this back after getting a better understanding. Ruben explained this as the ERM section. So we're looking at $200,000 savings by bringing it in-house. To Nicole's point, can we staff for these positions? Is it feasible at this time? So there's lots of other questions to be answered in terms of moving forward. I have shared most of these with you before. So the only thing I was going to bring back was the ADA, and I'll discuss that later in terms of what that looks like. And I was also asked to look at the ADA per funding per ADA, which I have later on in the presentation. So this list, after adding the $200,000, that we are $2.7 million in budget reductions that we're fairly comfortable with. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, well, wait a minute. No, this is where this was a question. Ruben?
Say it again.
This is the row 18. Is this supposed to be here, or is this what we're promising?
So that goes, Yeah, so that would have to go off, right? That's not, that's if we had eliminated that third vacancy, that's the Willard King, which we're not going to, looks like we're going to keep. So then that's no longer a cut.
Anything else? Anybody else has questions on? This is 149. This
I have
one
a
requires-
question.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, going back to the very, very top of the discussion.
On this list?
No, I'm thinking at the very beginning of the meeting. So if we go back and think about why we have to make these budget cuts in the first place, you had, there was a list of the 4 driving items, which I wrote down. Pensions, step cost, there was a third, and then special, whatever. So
Right. Okay.
has the, you know, when we were talking 2 weeks ago, a lot of the budget cuts were driven by lower enrollment. With the new governor's budget, are we no longer impacted on our budget by our lower enrollment?
Well, the governor proposed an average, we covered this, I think, 2 meetings ago with the budget, with the governor's budget. And I'll put a link to the multi-year projection. So the governor's budget with the revised staffing for or the revised ADA formula, as well as the increase in COLA, that's giving us $6.4 million. But because you remember when we did our budget before, we were forced to look at the impact of reduced enrollment. So we were looking at cutting $4.6 million and being barely positive, and additional cuts in the out year. This $6.4 million gives us a little bit, $1 million to kind of play with, of which we have now determined some is LCAP and some is supplemental. It gives us, we're not balanced, but it gives us an okay ending balance. So that's $6.4 million. We went from a $4.6 million cut to getting $6.4 million as a positive flowing in, some supplemental and some base. But we still, because of the pressures that are already built into our multi-year. So you remember our multi-year already has the increase in STIRS and PERS. So when we're putting in the explanations, these assumptions are already baked into the multi-year projections. So what we sorry, go ahead. Am I missing the point?
No, you are. No, I mean, your ability to tie together all these budgets is incredibly admirable. My mind, like, you know, and I love numbers, and you are just amazing at this. Thank you. I'm just kind of like, I keep, you know, over the last couple months, I keep thinking about the fundamental question is, we have lower enrollment and we're going into these programs with a surgical knife. And I'm incredibly thankful for all the work that you've done, you know, trying to figure these out. But are we really addressing the question that we have lower enrollment?
We have lower enrollment, but the teacher template that we're sharing, we're saving 7 positions. So even though it's not like this is what you need to look at, Nicole. So this is the impact here.
And I know we're doing the teacher, the template today at SPNO, so I might be jumping the gun here, but.
No, that's fine. So if you open the link to, I think I had this, targeted, is this it? No, that's our, hold on. Oh, here we are on row 12. If you open that, well, I don't even want to go through this right now because we're running out of time. But if we look at the impact of what we're saving $700,000 in teacher in staffing. We're also getting less from BSEP, so that impacts the general fund as well. So all of this that we're looking at, this is the net. We're saving somewhat, but not the cost of all the teachers. Because we have seven teachers will give us almost 700 and something thousand. But because we're getting less from BSEP, this is the issue. So Nicole, what you're running upon or hitting upon is our structural deficit. The fact that the district we're not balanced. And all of this money that we're getting, $6 million, is not going to dig us out of the hole. If we're trying to negotiate with our unions, if we're trying to fund these positions that we've kicked the can down the road, that there are people in positions that we don't want to get rid of and we want to continue programming. So as we try to add programming and as we try to work on the various programs that we're adding programming, but we have a structural deficit. And that is why that's why we need to make budget reductions.
Dan had his hand up.
Dan, yes, Dan.
I just wanted to see the detail on that CSR comparative that you had up in that little sort of mini thing. That, I assume that I can see that somewhere else.
Yeah, if you open, this is all in the agenda, Dan.
Right.
And if you open the agenda, you can open this link. And you can look at the staffing, like the enrollment, what we use to develop the teacher template, what we're paying for, and what we're getting less from BSEP. But we're actually we're paying for less teachers, but we're getting less from the BSEP. So that's the net impact.
Okay, I'll take a look at it. Thanks.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes. And we haven't even looked at the at where we need it to be. So why don't I have you guys look at this? I really wanted to go through all of this stuff. Let me see where we are. Let me see. We looked at the cut strategies. The expense scenarios is something else that you guys can look at as well. In terms of the one time. No, this number here has changed. So this is like where we kind of pull everything together. The $1 million that we're looking at, base and supplemental, this number has now gone to 2641, 476, right? So if you look at our proposals, now we're looking at the expenditure bucket, right? So we know that the one times that we kind of went through what we're not funding, what the general fund, that was a 361 the general fund is coming up with, other funding source. We still have to determine what we're looking at for CS, for our collective bargaining expenses. We know the impact of 1% is $1 million, the impact to the general fund. So all other funds and programs, BSEP and everything will have to take into account their share of a 1%, 2%, whatever we're doing in bargaining. COVID, we're proposing other funding. Matt, I wanted to share our approach with you on workers' comp because you had a question. We're thinking of doing an RFP for workers' comp to determine, is it worth our while to join a pool? So I've already been talking to SINE, School Innovations, and School Innovations, what does SINE stand for? I wrote it down. Anyway, I've been working with them to determine an achievement, School Innovations and Achievement. So we're not, it was a great idea because we're just kind of inheriting our actuarial studies. So we're getting another actuarial study to see if this funding rate is adequate. Good news is, after talking to SINE, this is a high rate for us. We may be able to reduce it, but in either case, we're proposing that we fund it over 2 years. We don't have to fund it all at once. So that would mean it would be a $320,000 hit for this year and deferring another $300,000 to the following year. So that's less of an impact for us. We left the safety coordinator, we don't have to. And these are all the central office operations. I wanted to go through this in more detail, but you guys can take a look at this. It's pretty well laid out. There's still some holes in the instructional program that we have to tie that together. But I do want to point out, we are increasing the FTE, Berkeley High Special Ed IAs, we're increasing their hours. It's a zero impact to the budget because we're using our overtime budget to actually fund this additional cost. So our IAs, sorry. Go
And I
ahead.
was just saying, that's just to make them essentially whole, right? Because right now they are only 0.8 and we ended up
Right.
time
So they're going
doing
from a,
timesheets for all this extra time.
right. So that would ease the rush on payroll as well. Is anybody still left here? I don't know. I think I'm babbling to myself.
And Janet's right, the IAs are, so this is specifically for the high school IAs, looking at that piece of it.
For just the Berkeley High School IAs. But just so you know, though, we have a proposal for transportation that's netting us a savings because we're eliminating 4 vacant positions to give the bus drivers full time 7.5-hour days versus these very weird combinations that they have now. And there's a link to that in the budget reductions spreadsheet. So so what does this mean to our target? So we're looking at buckets of expenses with the understanding that we haven't scored all our expenses, the $1 million from multi-year, as well as our reductions that we have now gone through and identified. We have this $2.3 million in a plus situation. If we're cutting 2.6 and we have 1, we have identified 1.3, so we're now working with a 2.3, fewer reductions, but of course we haven't scored all our expenses. Any questions? I know you guys have to go where we're over our time. And we have another meeting, right?
Of course, this is number 1 in the series.
So I just want to let, I can't remember who asked for the ADA, but there's a link here to our ADA document. There was a comment that we're funding at different, we're funding at different amounts per grade span. So this is from our calculator. When it eventually opens, you will get an idea of, is it ever gonna open? It's still taking its time, but oh, here we go. So who was it who asked that question?
That was Nicole, I thought.
No, it wasn't. No, it was Estella. It was Estella.
Estella, okay.
Yeah. So Estella, I put a link to this ADA so you can see for the different grades, we are funded at different amounts. This is the ADA actually that we've listed. So we were looking at increasing our ADA. So you're saying, well, doesn't it depend on the grade span? It does. And this is our funding in our LCFF calculator. This is such fun stuff, guys. Unbelievable. So this is our ADA here, this 9212. So you can see we get base funding of this amount. So we get more for the higher grades. We get grade span and we get supplemental funding. So this is just to show you, yes, it depends on where it is, but from the calculator, they want us to use an average funding per ADA. So so that's like 100,000. What am I saying? Is that right? I don't have it here. I didn't copy it, so that's kind of like my bad. But I'll correct this link. And I'll get that information for you. So even though it's all scattered, they come up with a funding per ADA that we use when we're kind of looking at just for budgeting purposes. Any other quick feedback or any questions? You can Vivian put in the link, a link to a document that you can use to come up with your comments or questions. And that's it. So can I thank everybody for attending? And sorry, it was kind of rushed towards the end. So I will, if you have any questions, please reach out to Vivian. Let me stop sharing so you can know I'm really here. I think and my video isn't done.
Thank you all for being here and being thought partners in this work. There's a lot.
It's a lot. Robin, good to see you. Estella, good. I'm only seeing like 4 people at the top of I'm on my laptop. I can't see anything. So everybody, let's remember our meeting. The next meeting was in our agenda. Janet, good to see you.
Nicole, are you good? Are you good to do the SBAC update to P&O, or are you gonna need me to jump?
No way, you're gonna have to talk us through that one for sure. And
Well,
just
we
because
have-
there's so much, so there's
There is a lot.
I will say I clicked into a couple of the links on the agenda, and some of them aren't shared with those of us outside. I think of a Berkeley email. I wasn't sure, but
No, I thought I put in anybody with the link on the internet can view. I'll make sure that the links all work. And if not, the actual files are in our shared doc. I
Okay.
put a copy of the files so you can look at them there as well. So
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you,
you're
Ruben.
welcome. All right, bye guys.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Vivian.
what's this
Bye,
look?
guys.
What's that, Pauline?
I know. It's like, oh dear God. We're gonna find you. Yeah, it's okay. We'll be fine. All right, guys. See you. Bye.
We'll be fine. That's what I say to my kids all the time when it's like, oh, I just got in a car accident. Oh, it's fine. Okay. It's all fine.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, actually. All right. See you, Nicole. Bye.